I threatened my husband with divorce. By morning, he took the kids and ruined my life. I threatened my husband with divorce to make him understand I was drowning. By morning, he'd vanished with our children and destroyed everything I had left. The story establishes a history of sacrifice. Angela had asked James, countless times, throughout their marriage if he'd share the parenting load, and he consistently promised he would. It transitions into the physical and emotional reality of their current life, 2 children under 5, a completely abandoned graphic design career, and the suffocating weight of solo parenting a man who'd slowly transformed from partner into controller. The morning she woke to an empty house, toys scattered like evidence of an abduction, Angela understood that James hadn't just heard her threat, he'd been waiting for it, his lawyer already on speed dial, her exhaustion already weaponized into a case file labeled, "Unfit Mother." Angela remembered the exact moment she fell in love with the idea of James White. It was their 3rd date, at a rooftop restaurant overlooking the city, when he'd taken her hand and said, "I want to build something real with you. Something that lasts." She was 25, hungry for stability after watching her parents' bitter divorce, and James seemed like the answer to questions she hadn't known she was asking. The whirlwind came fast. 6 months from first date to engagement. James's charm was intoxicating, flowers delivered to her studio apartment, weekend getaways, the way he'd wrap his arms around her from behind while she worked on design mock-ups and whisper, "You're incredible." He talked about family constantly, about creating the home he'd never had growing up, about traditional values and partnership. "Us against the world," he'd say, and Angela believed him. The isolation started so subtly she didn't recognize it as isolation. When her best friend Sarah threw a girls' weekend in Miami, James had squeezed her shoulder and said, "I'll miss you too much. Stay with me instead." She'd cancelled, feeling chosen. When her college friends invited her to weekly trivia nights, James would plan romantic dinners for the same evenings. "Don't you want to spend time together?" he'd ask, and she did. She always did. Then came Lily, and with her, James's insistence that our children deserve their mother at home, not distracted by clients and deadlines. Angela's freelance design career had been thriving, she'd just landed a contract with a major lifestyle brand worth $40,000. But James had looked at her across the kitchen table, his expression pained, and asked, "Don't you think our family should come first?" The guilt had hit her like a physical blow. What kind of mother chose work over her baby? She'd emailed the client that afternoon, declining the contract, her hands shaking as she typed. James had kissed her forehead and told her she was making the right choice, that she was going to be an amazing mother. She'd wanted so desperately to believe him. Looking back now, Angela could see it clearly, that was the moment she'd handed him the keys to her cage. She just hadn't realized she was walking into one. The criticism started small enough that Angela convinced herself she was being oversensitive. "The dishes are still in the sink," James would say, his tone light but his eyes cold. "I thought you'd have time to handle that." Or, "Lily's outfit doesn't really match today, does it?" Little comments that burrowed under her skin, making her second-guess everything. By the time Mason was born, the comments had metastasized into full critiques. Angela was too permissive with Lily, too strict with Mason, too anxious, too careless, too emotional, not emotional enough. James never raised his voice, he didn't need to. He'd simply tilt his head and ask, "Do you think that's the best approach?" until Angela felt incompetent in her own home. What disturbed her most was his phone. James documented everything now. Videos of the children playing, which seemed sweet until Angela noticed he was always capturing her in the background, exhausted, disheveled, snapping at Lily to please just sit down for 5 minutes. He'd film family dinners and bath times and lazy Sunday mornings, the camera always on. Lily's 5th birthday party was when Angela finally understood. She'd spent 2 days preparing, homemade cake, decorations, games for 12 5-year-olds hyped up on sugar. By the time the last parent picked up their child, Angela was running on fumes, her hair escaping its ponytail, frosting staining her shirt. James had been filming the whole party, playing the doting father, leading sing-alongs and organizing games. That night, he'd shown her the footage. There she was in the background, visible behind Lily blowing out candles, her face haggard, her eyes distant, looking nothing like the put-together mother she'd once compared herself to. "You look completely out of it," James had said, his voice laced with concern that felt more like accusation. "Are you okay?" She'd wanted to scream that she'd made everything from scratch, that she'd barely slept, that he'd done nothing but show up and smile for the camera. Instead, she'd whispered, "I'm just tired," and watched him save the video to his phone, filing it away like evidence. Tuesday morning arrived the way every morning arrived, too early and with too many needs demanding Angela's attention simultaneously. Mason woke screaming at 5:30, his diaper leaked, and by the time she'd cleaned him and the crib sheets, Lily was awake and demanding pancakes. James's alarm went off at 6, and he emerged from the bedroom showered and dressed, barely glancing at the chaos in the kitchen before grabbing his coffee and briefcase. "I have back-to-back showings today," he said, kissing the top of Lily's head but not Angela's. "Don't wait up." The door closed behind him, and Angela felt the weight of the day settle on her shoulders like a physical thing. Breakfast, dishes, laundry, Lily's preschool drop-off with Mason screaming in his car seat, groceries because they were out of milk and diapers and everything else. Back home for Mason's nap that he refused to take, more laundry, Lily's pickup, snack time, play time, dinner prep while breaking up fights over toys. By 4 in the afternoon, Angela realized she hadn't eaten anything except Lily's leftover toast crusts. She couldn't remember when she'd last showered. Her reflection in the bathroom mirror showed a stranger, someone with hollow eyes and unwashed hair, wearing yesterday's t-shirt with spit up on the shoulder. She'd asked James for help exactly once that week. He'd looked up from his laptop and said, "What do you do all day?" The question had hung in the air between them, so absurd she'd actually laughed, a bitter sound that scared her. "Never mind," she'd said, and he'd already looked back at his screen. The breaking point came that afternoon. Angela had locked herself in the bathroom, desperate for 5 minutes of peace, and turned on the shower. Both children were crying, Mason because Lily had taken his toy, Lily because she was tired and overwhelmed and 3 years old. Angela heard James's office door open, heard his footsteps in the hallway. For one hopeful moment, she thought he'd help. He walked past the bathroom. She heard his office door close again, the lock clicking into place. Angela slid down the shower wall, water pouring over her still-clothed body, and sobbed into her hands. Somewhere in the distance, her children were still crying. She couldn't remember the last time she'd felt like a person instead of a machine that produced meals and clean laundry and patience she didn't have. This was her life now. This was all her life would ever be. The monitoring started in June, disguised as helpfulness. James suggested they consolidate their bank accounts for easier budgeting, and suddenly Angela needed to explain every transaction. A $12 Target purchase required justification. Coffee with her former colleague became an interrogation about whether that money could have been better spent on the household. "I'm just trying to be financially responsible," James would say when Angela pushed back. "We have 2 kids now. We need to be smart about money." He said it so reasonably that Angela felt crazy for being upset, even as she watched her independence dissolve transaction by transaction. His criticism evolved into something sharper. Angela was too soft on Lily, giving in to every tantrum. She was too harsh on Mason, expecting too much from a toddler. She was too emotional, crying at the smallest things. She was too detached, not present enough with the children. Every day brought new accusations, each one contradicting the last until Angela couldn't remember what she was supposed to be. When she tried to address it, James would look at her with manufactured concern and say things like, "I think you're reading too much into this," or "You're being really defensive right now," or "Is this about your hormones?" He'd turned her own exhaustion into a weapon, wielding it so skillfully that Angela began to doubt her own memory of conversations they'd had. The worst came in July, when James's mother visited for Sunday dinner. Angela had spent the day cooking, trying desperately to prove she had everything under control. She'd made pot roast and roasted vegetables and homemade rolls, and by the time they sat down to eat, she was trembling with exhaustion. "We're so glad you could come, Mom," James said, squeezing his mother's hand. Then, almost casually, as if the thought had just occurred to him, he added, "Actually, I've been meaning to talk to you. I'm really worried about Angela's mental state lately." Angela froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. James continued as if she weren't sitting right there, as if she'd become invisible. "She's been so overwhelmed, so emotional. I'm concerned she might need professional help. Don't you think, Mom?" His mother's eyes flicked to Angela with something that looked like pity. "Well, postpartum depression can last a long time, dear. Maybe you should talk to someone." Angela sat there, shocked into complete silence, while her husband and his mother discussed her mental health as if she were a problem to be solved. She wanted to scream, to defend herself, to explain that she was drowning because he'd made sure she had no life raft. Instead, she said nothing at all, and later that night, she realized that her silence was exactly what James had been counting on. Mason's fever spiked at 11 p.m. on a Thursday, his small body burning against Angela's chest as she paced the hallway, trying to soothe his crying. She'd been awake for 36 hours straight, Mason had an ear infection, Lily had nightmares, and Angela's body had stopped recognizing the difference between day and night. James was in bed, scrolling through his phone, the blue light illuminating his face in the darkness. "James, I need help," Angela said from the doorway, Mason wailing in her arms. "Please. I can't do this anymore." He didn't look up. "I have an important client meeting at 7. I need to sleep." Something inside Angela cracked. Not broke, breaking implied suddenness, a clean snap. This was slower, more devastating. The final thread holding her together simply gave up. "I've been awake for a day and a half," she said, her voice shaking. "Your son has a fever. I'm asking you to be a parent. Don't be dramatic." James set down his phone, his expression hardening. "You're home all day. I have a real job. I can't function on no sleep." "A real job?" Angela's laugh was jagged, dangerous. "Taking care of our children isn't a real job. That's not what I meant. Maybe we shouldn't be married if you can't be a partner." The words escaped before Angela could stop them, but once they were out, she felt a strange sense of relief. "Maybe I can't do this anymore." James's face changed. The irritation vanished, replaced by something cold and calculated that Angela had never seen before. He reached for his phone, and Angela watched in confusion as he held it up, the camera facing her. "What are you doing?" "Go ahead," he said quietly. "Say it again." Understanding came too late. "James, stop. Say it. Say what you really mean." His voice was calm, almost gentle, and that gentleness was more terrifying than any rage could have been. Angela was shaking now, Mason's cries blending with the pounding of her heart. She knew she should stop, should walk away, but exhaustion and anger and 3 years of swallowed words came pouring out. "I'm done," she heard herself say, her voice breaking. "I want a divorce." James tapped his phone screen, stopping the recording. He set it down carefully on the nightstand, then looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. "Okay," he said simply. "If that's what you want." The calmness of his response should have warned her. Instead, Angela turned and walked back to Mason's room, her son still crying against her shoulder. She spent the rest of the night on the floor beside his crib, listening to his labored breathing, unaware that she'd just activated a trap James had been setting for months. When dawn finally came, Angela felt nothing but exhaustion. She didn't know that by sunrise, everything she loved would be gone. The silence was wrong, that was the first thing Angela noticed when she opened her eyes that Friday morning. No small feet running down the hallway, no Lily calling, "Mommy," from her bedroom, no Mason's babbling from his crib. Just silence, heavy and suffocating, pressing against her eardrums. Angela sat up from where she'd fallen asleep on Mason's floor, her neck screaming in protest. His crib was empty. She stumbled to Lily's room, empty. Both their overnight bags were gone from the closet. Their favorite stuffed animals, missing from the beds. James. Her voice came out strange, too high. She ran to their bedroom. His side of the bed was untouched, still perfectly made from yesterday morning. His work clothes were gone from the closet. His toiletries, absent from the bathroom counter. On the kitchen table, a single piece of paper. Angela's hands shook so badly she could barely read the words, "I've taken the children somewhere they'll be safe. My attorney will be in contact. Somewhere they'll be safe." As if Angela were the danger. As if she hadn't spent every waking moment for 3 years keeping them alive, keeping them fed, keeping them loved. She called James's phone. Voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. 15 times, each one going straight to his automated message, his voice pleasant and professional. "You've reached James White. Please leave a message." Angela called her bank, her fingers stumbling over the numbers. "I need to check my account balance." The automated system responded, "Checking account, $0. Savings account, $0. She'd had $4,000 in there yesterday, grocery money, emergency money, the small amount she'd managed to save from selling old design equipment. "There must be a mistake," she told the representative, her voice breaking. "My money. I'm showing the account holder withdrew all funds at 6:15 this morning, ma'am." 6:15. While Angela had been sleeping beside Mason's crib, James had been systematically dismantling her life. She called the police with shaking hands. Explained about her children, about the note, about waking up to find them gone. The officer's voice was kind but firm. "Ma'am, if he's their father, this is a civil custody matter. You'll need to contact a lawyer." A lawyer? With what money? With what energy? Angela slid down the kitchen wall, the phone still pressed to her ear, and felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. Every toy scattered across the living room floor suddenly looked like evidence of an abduction. The cereal bowls still in the sink from yesterday's breakfast felt like archaeological artifacts from a life that had ended overnight. She'd threatened divorce. James had executed it. And somehow, in 12 hours, he'd made sure she'd lose everything in the process. The text came through at 2 p.m., from a number Angela didn't recognize. "This is Robert Chen from Chen and Associates, representing James White in the matter of your pending divorce and custody arrangement. Please review the attached documentation and have your attorney contact our office within 48 hours. Angela's hands trembled as she opened the attachment. The words swam before her eyes: emergency petition for custody. Allegations of explosive behavior. Mental instability. Inability to adequately care for minor children. There were screenshots, texts where Angela had vented to James about how exhausted she was, how she felt like she was failing. Except he'd cut out all his dismissive responses, leaving only her desperation looking like evidence of incompetence. There was a transcript. The recording from last night, except on paper, her words looked monstrous: "I can't do this anymore. I'm done. I want a divorce." Nothing about Mason's fever, nothing about James's refusal to help, nothing about 36 hours without sleep. Just her voice, unhinged and threatening. The documentation listed witnesses: James's mother, who would testify to Angela's concerning behavior at Sunday dinner. James's colleague, who'd apparently seen Angela, disheveled and crying, at a grocery store. Even their pediatrician's notes were there. Every time Angela had called worried about Mason's breathing, Lily's rash, normal maternal concern weaponized as evidence of excessive anxiety and inability to assess situations rationally. Angela was still staring at the screen when her phone rang. Her mother. "Honey, James called me this morning." Her mother's voice was cautious, uncertain in a way that made Angela's stomach drop. "He said you've been struggling. That you threatened to leave him and the children. Is that true? Why didn't you tell me you were having such a hard time?" Mom, that's not, he's twisting everything. He sounded so worried about you, Angela. He said he's been begging you to see someone, to get help, and you've been refusing. He sent me a video and sweetie, you looked really unwell. Angela closed her eyes, seeing herself through the camera lens at Lily's birthday party. Exhausted. Frazzled. Exactly like a woman who couldn't cope. James had created a narrative so careful, so complete, that even her own mother was questioning her. She opened Facebook then, something she'd barely touched in months, and saw James's post from that morning. A photo of him and the children, all three of them smiling. The caption, spending some quality father-kid time this weekend. Sometimes families need space to heal. Praying for peace and wisdom during difficult times. #fatherhood #family #blessings. The comments were full of support. You're such a good dad. Praying for you guys. Stay strong. Angela's own friends, women she hadn't spoken to in months because James had carefully engineered her isolation, were offering him encouragement. He'd taken her children. He'd taken her money. And now, post by post, text by text, he was taking her reputation, her support system, her very reality. By the time anyone heard Angela's side of the story, James had already made sure no one would believe it. The courthouse felt like a fluorescent-lit nightmare. Angela sat beside her court-appointed attorney, a tired-looking woman named Patricia who'd had 15 minutes to review her case, and watched James across the aisle. He was wearing his best suit, the charcoal one he'd worn to their wedding. His expression was perfectly calibrated, concerned father, reluctant litigant, man doing what he had to do to protect his children. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, reviewed the petition. Angela's heart hammered so hard she thought it might crack a rib. James's attorney stood first, a polished man in his 50s who spoke with the confidence of someone who'd never lost. Your Honor, my client is seeking emergency custody due to serious concerns about the children's welfare. Ms. White has exhibited increasingly erratic behavior, culminating in threats of abandonment. He pulled up the recording on a laptop. Angela heard her own voice fill the courtroom. I can't do this anymore. I'm done. I want a divorce. Stripped of context, she sounded unhinged. Dangerous, even. Mr. White has documented numerous incidents of concern, the attorney continued, pulling up photos on a screen. There was Angela at the grocery store, mascara smeared from crying. Angela in the background of videos, always exhausted, always overwhelmed. Screenshots of texts where she'd written things like, I don't even recognize myself anymore, and, sometimes I look at them and feel nothing but exhaustion. The judge's expression grew more skeptical with each piece of evidence. Angela wanted to scream that of course she was exhausted, she'd been parenting alone for 3 years. That of course she looked overwhelmed, she was. But every attempt to explain sounded like excuses, like a woman unwilling to accept responsibility. James took the stand, his voice steady and pained. I love my wife, Your Honor. But I'm terrified for my children's safety. Angela has been refusing help, refusing to see a therapist, becoming more volatile. When I suggested she needed support, she threatened to leave me and the children. I had to protect them. It was masterful. Every word technically true, every word completely misleading. Angela felt Patricia's hand squeeze her shoulder, a gesture that felt more like condolence than encouragement. When Angela took the stand, her voice shook. She tried to explain about the isolation, the constant criticism, James's refusal to help with the children. But her attorney hadn't had time to gather evidence, and Angela's words sounded hollow against James's carefully constructed case. The judge's decision was temporary but devastating. Primary physical custody to James White pending full evaluation. Angela would have supervised visitation twice a week. The judge's frown when she delivered the ruling told Angela everything she needed to know. She'd been outmaneuvered. Her exhaustion had been weaponized. And now she was a woman who saw her children 4 hours a week, under the watchful eye of a court-appointed supervisor, while James played the hero who'd saved them from their unstable mother. Angela spent 3 days in a kind of fog, barely eating, barely sleeping, replaying the hearing in her mind until the words lost meaning. On the 4th day, she got angry. She started with her laptop, searching through every file, every document, every scrap of digital history James had left behind. That's when she found it, browser history from 4 months ago, when Angela had still thought they were happy. Searches for emergency custody procedures. Documenting spouse's mental instability. How to win custody battle. A folder of bookmarked family law websites, opened and carefully studied months before their argument. James hadn't snapped. He'd planned. Every recording, every photograph, every perfectly timed moment of Angela at her worst, it had all been deliberate. He'd been building his case long before she'd threatened divorce, just waiting for the right moment to execute it. Angela took screenshots of everything. Timestamps, search histories, the dates he'd begun recording her without consent. Then she started reaching out, beginning with her former colleague Rachel, the one woman James hadn't managed to completely cut her off from. "I need help," Angela wrote. "I need the name of a good lawyer." Rachel responded within an hour, "I know someone who specializes in cases like this. Her name is Diana Torres. She's expensive, but she's won against worse." Diana Torres met Angela in a small coffee shop, listening without interruption as Angela laid out everything, the isolation, the control, the premeditation. When Angela finished, Diana leaned back and said, "I've seen this before. More times than you'd think. Coercive control doesn't leave bruises, but it's abuse all the same." They built a case brick by brick. Diana found other women, 2 of James's ex-girlfriends who'd experienced similar patterns of control and manipulation. They gathered text messages showing James's refusal to help with the children, his dismissive responses to Angela's exhaustion. They created a timeline proving his browser history proved premeditation. Angela started documenting everything too. She kept a journal of every supervised visit, every time Lily asked when she was coming home, every tear Mason cried for his mother. She reached out to old friends, admitting she'd been isolated, asking if they'd testify about how James had slowly cut her off from everyone who cared about her. The custody evaluation took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of Angela rebuilding herself piece by piece, remembering who she'd been before James had systematically dismantled her identity. 6 weeks of supervised visits where she had to prove she was stable enough to mother her own children. 6 weeks of James playing the martyr on social media while Angela fought in silence. The second hearing was different. Diana presented their evidence methodically, the premeditation, the pattern of control, the testimony of women who'd been through the same manipulation. When James took the stand this time, his performance faltered under Diana's questioning. His careful mask slipped when she asked him to explain the browser history from 4 months earlier. I was concerned even then. Concerned enough to research custody procedures before any argument occurred. Concerned enough to document your wife's every vulnerable moment for months. The judge's expression changed as the truth emerged. It wasn't a complete victory, the system doesn't hand children back overnight, doesn't erase the damage of manipulation easily. But it was enough. Joint custody with a transition plan. Mandated therapy for James addressing coercive control. An investigation into his premeditated actions. 3 months later, Angela stood in her small apartment, not the grand house James had kept, but hers, with Lily and Mason running through rooms she'd painted herself. Her design portfolio was open on the kitchen table, new projects filling the spaces where exhaustion used to live. The walls were covered with her artwork again, bright splashes of color that reminded her who she'd been before she'd lost herself. James had taken everything, or tried to. But Angela had discovered something he couldn't steal. She was stronger than the woman she'd been when she'd sat crying on that shower floor. She'd found her voice again, and this time, she wasn't letting anyone silence it. The photograph from their wedding was gone from the mantel. In its place, a picture of Angela with her children, all three of them laughing, in a moment James hadn't orchestrated or controlled. Just them, messy and real and finally free.